The device showed up in a surplus disposal box last spring, between a cracked field radio and a headset with one ear cup missing. Tan plastic, palm-sized, a compact backup recorder from the early years of the war. I almost signed the destruction form without opening it. Then I saw the 9-second file still saved on the internal drive, and I sat down on the edge of a supply table and held it for a long time. I haven't listened to it again. I don't need to. I know what she heard in those 9 seconds. What I didn't know, on the day she heard it, was who she was. That's the part I've carried. FOB Carath had a targeting section in a concrete building that smelled like circuit boards and burnt coffee, and in November of that year, we were 14 days into a signals blackout that was making Captain Doyle's left eye twitch. The HVT we'd been tasked to locate had gone dark. Every direction-finding asset on the compound had been working the problem since the first week of October. We had antenna arrays on the roof, and 3 qualified analysts running spectrum analysis in shifts, and the best we'd produced was a probability ellipse, the size of a city district. 14 days. Not good enough. It was never going to be good enough at that rate, and Doyle knew it, and everyone in the section knew it, and no one said so out loud because there was nothing useful in saying it. She arrived on a Tuesday morning with a small logistics convoy, carrying a manila folder of transfer orders and a duffel bag. She reported to the admin desk. The orders listed her as an administrative records coordinator, which was what she told the desk NCO when he asked, and which was what the desk NCO wrote on the billet sheet, and which was what the billet sheet said when it landed on the targeting section's door 3 hours later. Captain Doyle was reading through personnel assignments when I brought him the sheet. Records coordinator, he said. Why is a records coordinator being billeted to my section? I told him I didn't know. Find out. I found out that her supplement folder hadn't made the transit with her orders. The command changeover in Ramstein had separated her records jacket from her classification supplement during a batch transfer, and the supplement was in a holding queue somewhere in the European theater. She had requested a forward transfer for the supplement 3 weeks prior. It hadn't come. I told Doyle this. He looked at the billet sheet for a moment. She waits for the supplement, he said. Until I have a complete file, she's admin. Keep her out of the targeting room. That was a reasonable thing to say. I believed it was a reasonable thing to say. I wrote her name on the admin roster and did not argue. The briefing that afternoon had 22 people in it. She knocked on the door at the beginning and said she'd been told to report for the targeting session. Doyle was standing at the front of the room with a laser pointer in his hand. He looked at her the way you look at something that has wandered into the wrong building. Ma'am, he said, I don't bring clerks to a targeting brief. The admin office is down the hall. She looked at him for 1 full second. 1 second, and no more. Then she said, understood, picked up her folder from under her arm, and went. The door closed. Doyle turned back to the probability ellipse on the screen, and someone in the front row asked a question about the secondary antenna bearing, and that was that. I was sitting in the 3rd row. I watched her go and I said nothing. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count. I found her that evening in the back corridor of the signals equipment room, which was technically not a place she was authorized to be, though no one had told her that specifically. She had pulled a portable backup recorder out from under a shelf, the kind used for field collection before the permanent arrays went up, analog to digital, palm-sized, a model 2 or 3 years out of standard issue, and she had plugged it into a wall outlet and was running it against a secondary output tap from the antenna array. She had a legal pad across her knee, and she was drawing something, not writing. Drawing. That's not supposed to be accessible from this output, I said. I know, she said. I'm not pulling anything live. I'm running the archive. She didn't look up. There's a fragmentary capture from October 9th. 9 seconds. The automated system flagged it as out-of-band noise and archived it. Nobody's pulled it. How did you know to look for it? The ellipse your team produced has a consistent bearing drift, 11 degrees across 14 days. She held up the legal pad. She had drawn a set of interlocking arcs, bearing lines, hand-plotted, the way people used to do it before the software came in. 4 lines, each one annotated with a date and a frequency margin. They converged at a point that was not in the center of our probability ellipse. It was not even close to the center. The drift pattern is consistent with a moving relay station on a 3 to 4 day rotation cycle. If the original transmission on October 9th was from a static node before the relay went mobile, the 9 seconds of it that got captured should fix the originating position. I looked at the legal pad. I looked at the backup recorder. I said, the automated system flagged it as noise. Out of band for the primary collection target, she said. Not noise. Wrong frequency range for what your tasking said to look for, but not noise. She plugged in a set of field headphones and listened to the 9-second file. She sat very still while it played. She listened to it twice, and then a third time, and between the second and third listening, she made 2 small marks on the legal pad, each one a slight angular adjustment to 2 of the existing arcs. So slight, I almost didn't see her pencil move. The 4 lines still converged at the same point. She wrote a grid coordinate at the bottom of the page, 8 digits. She tore the sheet off carefully, along the edge, and held it out to me. 40-meter accuracy, she said. Maybe less. There's a compound at that grid. I'd start there. I took the paper. I stood in the back corridor of the signals equipment room at FOB Karath, and I held a hand-drawn grid coordinate from a woman who was on the admin billet sheet, and I thought about the 14 days we'd spent on the probability ellipse. 3 qualified analysts working in shifts, the antenna array on the roof, all of it. 9 seconds of archived signal, a legal pad, a borrowed recorder. I need to take this to Doyle, I said. Yes, she said. She unplugged the headphones and set the recorder back under the shelf with the same care she'd taken it out with. You do. I told Captain Doyle I'd found something in the archive. I did not tell him who found it, because I was 23 years old and I thought it would be simpler that way, and I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. I told him there was a fragmentary signal from October 9th that hadn't been pulled. I told him about the bearing drift pattern. I handed him the legal pad. He looked at it for a long time. Who drew this? He said. I told him. He looked at the legal pad again. He looked at the grid coordinate at the bottom. Then he stood up and walked the coordinate to the section chief, and the section chief walked it to the captain of the ISR platform, and the ISR platform captain made 2 calls, and 6 hours later, at 0340, a joint element hit the compound at that coordinate. The HVT was there, alive, at the compound, 40 meters from the center of the 8-digit grid on the torn legal pad. The debrief was the next afternoon. Doyle had the targeting section assembled, plus the ISR platform captain and the 2 senior analysts who'd been running the spectrum work since October. He had a copy of the legal pad on the table, the original, not a scan. He walked through the capture sequence. He walked through the grid. He talked about the timeline. Then he got to the bearing plot methodology, and he stopped. He picked up the legal pad, and he looked at it the way you look at something you recognize from somewhere you can't immediately name. The 4 arcs, the drift annotations in the margin, the way each bearing line had been extended and corrected with 2 small marks. Who produced this notation method? He said. He wasn't asking me. He was asking the room. The section chief shook his head. The 2 senior analysts looked at each other. Doyle set the pad down and pulled a different document from the folder on the table. A theater-level technical reference. The Radio Direction Finding Employment Guide, current edition, issued to every analyst in the command, and sitting in a 3-ring binder on every desk in the section. He opened it to page 14. The diagrams on page 14 looked exactly like the drawings on the legal pad. Same arc construction. Same drift correction notation in the margins. Same 4-bearing convergence method. Same angular shorthand for frequency variance. And in the bottom margin of page 14, beneath the figures, the same precise handwriting. Doyle read the authorship block. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me. Go get her, he said. She came in still carrying her manila folder. She stood at the back of the room, because there were no empty chairs, and she didn't ask for one. She looked at the legal pad on the table, and the open technical reference beside it, and she waited. Doyle said, You wrote the RDF employment guide. The first 2 editions, she said. The 3rd edition incorporated corrections from 2 analysts in 7th Army. The methodology is theirs as much as mine. We've been running your methodology for 4 years, he said. Every analyst in this theater. Every direction-finding operation since June of the year before last. I know. Doyle stood up. He was a Navy captain, and he was not a man given to gestures. He stood up from his chair at the head of the debrief table, and he looked at her across the room, and then he rendered a full formal salute and held it. The section chief stood, the ISR platform captain stood, the 2 senior analysts stood. Every person in that room stood without being asked, and the room was quiet, and she returned the salute without ceremony and without anything on her face except what had been there the whole time. The same patience she'd had in the back corridor with the backup recorder across her knees. The same patience she'd had at the door of the targeting brief when Doyle had told her to go find the admin office. She had not been waiting to be recognized. She had been working the problem. Those are not the same thing, and it took me a long time to understand the difference. I'm not sure I fully do yet, but I'm closer than I was when I was sitting in the 3rd row watching her leave without saying a word. The supplement arrived 11 days later. It was 43 pages. I read it from the front cover. By page 6, I had to stop and sit for a while. Doyle filed a formal billet correction that afternoon. He wrote it himself, which was not something captains usually did for their own admin paperwork. And it went to the theater commander with a priority flag, and it came back approved in under 4 hours. I don't know everything it said. I know what the section felt like after it came back. Different. Not louder, just different. I've thought about the back corridor many times since then, about the 9 seconds on the backup recorder that the algorithm had decided was noise, about the 14 days we'd spent generating a probability ellipse while the fragmentary signal sat in the archive 3 doors down the hall, correctly filed under out-of-band captures, waiting, about the fact that she found it in an evening because she read the drift pattern in our own data and understood what it meant, and about the fact that I had been looking at that same data every day for 2 weeks and hadn't seen it. She wasn't lucky. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was in the back corridor doing the work that the table had failed to do, with a borrowed recorder and a legal pad, and 19 years of knowing exactly what 9 seconds of signal sounded like when it mattered. I signed the surplus disposal form for the recorder eventually. I kept the 9-second file on a thumb drive. The form has a remarks field, and that field is still blank. I haven't filled it in. I've thought about what to write. The closest I've gotten is this. It is the record of the 9 seconds the system decided wasn't worth keeping, and that she decided to pull anyway. And the distance between those 2 decisions is something I am still learning to measure correctly.